you doing? Does anybody have any delusion in their head that if like an advanced alien species were to land and they had their children with them, they're equivalent of like a 6 or 8-year-old that, like that 8-year-old who basically hadn't been to school yet could tell you what gravity is, whereas a PhD professor of physics would give you the wrong answer? Well, the answer is, of course, yes. The 5-year-old advanced alien would know infinitely more, would actually know the correct answer than a PhD professor of theoretical physics or just physics in general. You know, all of these people, and I'm going to get to explaining gravity here, and the reason why I made the video on gravity has been a lot of questions on live stream about gravity. You can make it even more simple, because we could even erase the definition around gravity that it's a field. Yeah? How do you do that? Well, it's very, very simple. Of course, you know the definition of dimension is a measurable extent of some kind, such as length, breadth, depth, or height. And of course, humanity suffers from the collective ignorance that there are 4 dimensions: length, width, depth, and time. Time is a measure, so we can actually correctly apply that to a dimension, but time is only a measure. It's not a thing in and of itself. Now, I'm pretty sure, like about 200% certain, that length, width, and depth are all descriptors of dimensionality itself, i.e. the force vector of something that has a Cartesian value. You know, they can plot it on an XYZ coordinate. So we could put length, width, and depth together because they describe something with mass and magnitude. Time is only a measure of mass and magnitude. So the idea of how many dimensions that there are, the answer is 1. Yeah? 1. That's like saying, like I'm fat, right? Fat's 1 dimension, husky is another dimension, and portly is the 3rd dimension. Those are all referring to the exact same thing. That's like a beautiful woman. Well, she's beautiful, she's hot, and she's gorgeous, and sexy and attractive. There you go, there's 5 dimensions. They're all referring to the exact same thing. So, if you think about it, and by the way, go ahead and leave a comment if you like. I read every comment. If you think that there's more than 1 dimension, you're wrong. And that's nothing different than I've said since the beginning of time. There is only one force vector, i.e. magnetism, which of course is the dielectric field, the loss of energy or inertia, which of course is toroidal. Interestingly enough, the torus or the donut has a hole in the center. And that's where the people say, well, that's the donut hole. I'm like, yeah, well, the donut hole is actually not part of the donut. Yeah, there's nothing there. It'd be interesting if you could sell the holes. In the case of actual donuts, they plop out a little center section and make a donut or a torus. And then they do sell donut holes, which is something. It's made out of dough and sugar and whatnot, right? Haven't had a donut in 20 years, by the way. But that's not a thing. These academicians love to call gravity a force. And gravity is not only not a force, it's a complete opposite of a force. It's completely impossible to think of it any other way. These academicians literally show gravity in their diagrams. I was looking at one a few hours ago as the acceleration towards the center of a torus. Well, as far as a graphic is concerned, that's quite accurate. But then they call it a force. But an acceleration is not a force. Now, force requires the expenditure of energy. You know, like force, like you're pressing the gas pedal, you burn a little gasoline, and then, you know, it turns the crankshaft and the wheels, and you go down the road. You know, that's the application of force. Magnetism is force. Of course, the centrifugal force vector, centrifugal divergence, is, of course, nature's fundamental force. You can't say that letting go of this rock where it accelerates towards the Earth, and the Earth is actually also, too, accelerating towards the rock, but they're actually not accelerating towards one another, rather towards a null point between both. You can't say that that's a force. There's no energy expended there. Not only that, there's the opposite of energy expended. There's erasure of space itself, which has no properties, and I'm quoting Nikola Tesla. But it does have attributes. Of course, space is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. This is the centrifugal force vector that is magnetism, and magnetism, of course, is a dielectric field. We don't actually have ice, as the case of an iceberg, right? in the Titanic. Ice in the ocean being water, right? It's more than just water. It's salinity, of course. But I mean, ice is just a cold modality of water. It's like, well, there's ice and there's water. We got ice in the water. No, we actually have water and the water. We just have two different modalities of water. Human beings love to pigeonhole things. I'm quoting these academicians, by the way, who are saying, the mystery of gravity is that it is an attractive force. Well, it's not a force at all. The one thing that these academicians, that I can laud them for, of the million things that they get wrong, and their academic hubris, they will admit, flat out admit, they have no idea what gravity is. The reason why is because there's ever been only two foundations of reality. One's been based in atomism, the other one has been based in the ether. You can't explain gravity with bumping particles. However, they will tell you that, according to quantum explains gravity. This is their words, not mine. They're saying that objects are emitting, once again, atomism. Emitting, this is hilarious. This is like something a drunk psychopath would say. Emitting negative momentum gluons on the level of quarks. Yeah, that makes perfect sense if you're insane and drunk. Sir Isaac Newton famously said, hypothesis non fingo, which means I do not feign hypothesis. The really important quote from Sir Isaac Newton refers to Letters to Bentley, 1692. It is inconceivable that inanimate matter, without the mediation of something else, which is not material, operate upon and affect matter without mutual contact. Gravity should be innate, inherent, and essential to matter, such that it's actually not inherent to matter. It's actually innate to the ether. And of course, matter is an ether perturbation modality, specifically super high energy light, but they all operate the exact same way. There's 5 different things that are referred to differently, but which are one and the same thing I'll get to in a second. Gravity should be innate, inherent to essential matter, says Isaac Newton, so that one body may act upon another at a distance through a vacuum, without the mediation of anything else, by and through which their action, of course, may be conveyed to one another, which is blatantly obvious, is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has philosophical matters a competent faculty of thinking could ever fall for it. Gravity must be caused by an agent acting constantly according to certain laws, that of course being the ether. But whether this agent be material or immaterial, I have left to the consideration of my readers. So this is Sir Isaac Newton in his great brilliance saying, I have no idea. It's a great mystery. It defies a simple explanation. Actually, the explanation is incredibly simple. But an energy nexus is, of course, at the hole where it is nowhere and accelerates like the center of the spiral arm galaxy. What about the holes in fields? Yeah. In the case of a hyperboloid, this, of course, in the case of an object with a point source field, there is nothing there. There's the hole on the either end of the hyperboloid. In the case of the torus, there's the hole in the center, and that hole, of course, is not a force. You know, at the center of every field modality, there is not that field modality. The acceleration towards the center of gravity, which is actually not at the center of an object, there is no gravity. At the center of a torus, there is no magnetism. You could actually put 2 magnets together with a magnetic Gauss meter probe in the middle of them, and you'll actually sense no magnetic field whatsoever. There is not. You could actually see this on the 1,000 or 1,500 ferrocell or supercell videos that I've uploaded for people to look at. You can see at the center of any magnet, no matter how powerful it is or is not, there's this black hole right in the center where there is no magnetic flux of constructive and destructive interference. There's like a sink, you know, people say, oh, it looks like a black hole. What everybody thinks a black hole looks like, due to science fiction, of course. But a hole is not a field. The center of a torus and the center of a vector of acceleration, there is not that field. Center of magnetism, there's no magnetism. Center of a vector of gravity, in other words, an acceleration vector, there is no gravity. A hole is not a field. A field, of course, is an ether perturbation modality. Here begs the question, what if Mother Nature really was, and she is, that hairy armpit chick, you know, that keeps things really simple, really divinely simple, but human beings really are that incredibly stupid. Let's just say unenlightened. We've already established, it is undeniable, there really is only one dimension. Length, width, and depth are not 3 different things. Those are vectors on a Cartesian chart to extrapolate out the dimensionality of something that human beings can ideate it and recreate it. You know, okay, it's 8 inches long and 2 inches wide, and, you know. Those are all in reference to mass and magnitude, and time is another measure. So there's only one dimension. What if it were the case, and it is the case, that there's only one field? Let's work on that a bit, because gravity is not really a field, and I've said this since day one. It's really an anti-field. What if we dug a hole in the middle of your yard? It's like, well, this is the field, which it is, right? It's literally a field. And the Greek word being kora. And we dug a hole. It's like, man, if you fall into this, you're going to trip and break your leg. And it's like there's no dirt down there, and it just keeps going and going like a really big bottomless hole almost, right? Well, that's a different kind of field. That is the umbra kora. Let's use Greek words. Umbra kora. This is the kora, the field that you're walking on with the green grass and everything, the fluffy bunny rabbits. And this is the umbra kora. This is what humanity really has done since the beginning of time. We pigeonhole things. Gravity is not a field, it's an anti-field. It's the erasure of the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, which of course is space. But space has no properties, to quote Nikola Tesla, which is extremely accurate. A hole is definitely not a field modality. What is the field of gravity? We don't know. Or if you're an atomist, they will say, quantum explains gravity is the omission. They're literally saying that when two objects are accelerating towards one another, and they're actually not accelerating towards one another, they're accelerating towards this, right between both, that this is the emission. They say they're emitting negative momentum gluons. Well, you really do have to be psychotic and drunk to believe something that stupid. Oh, how dare you! There's a professor of, a peer-reviewed professor of quantum physics who wrote that. Who are you, you fat bald tattooed guy? You're nobody at all. How could you refute him? Well, that's a that's a fallacy. But that's a matter for another discussion. So ultimately we have force and motion, inertia and acceleration. Inertia and acceleration are not field-based, they're anti-field-based. Here's several things that are one thing exactly. A hyperboloidal geometry, by the way, this hourglass shape is a hyperboloid. The hyperboloidal geometry of a point source mass in the case of a magnet. And everything is magnetic. Everything is either paramagnetic, diamagnetic, ferromagnetic. Doesn't make any difference. Everything is magnetoreactive. But in the case of a point source object, that being a magnet, which is qualitative, not quantitative, the hyperboloidal geometry of that mass is one thing, which is no different than a dendritic discharge. Lightning is a desaturation and dendritic discharge into counter space. So a dendritic discharge, a hyperboloidal geometry of a mass, i.e. the vector of inertia and acceleration, that black hole you see on the supercell, which I've uploaded over 1,500 videos on the supercell. So-called magnetic attraction, which is not magnetism at all. Yeah, I have two magnets here, like polarity, they push apart. That's actual real force. Over here, we turn them around north-south or south-north. They're accelerating towards one another. So, well, since they're magnets and they're accelerating, the conclusion is that therefore is magnetic attraction. But there is no such thing as magnetic attraction. But that crazy idea in the minds of unevolved and intellectually inferior humans has existed for thousands. They're magnets and are accelerating, therefore it's magnetic attraction. No, that's absolutely not the case. That is the exact same thing. Same thing as gravity. The smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. Force is always, of course, the dissipation of energy. Remember the ferrocell hole right in the middle? So all these things are exactly the same thing. The hyperboloidal geometry of a mass, as seen on the supercell, dendritic discharge, such as lightning discharge. Dielectricity actually takes two forms. If it's a mass desaturation, its geometry is dendritic. And what's beautiful and amazing about dendritic, i.e. dielectric or electrostatic discharges, is they're actually following the path of least resistance for discharge into counter space, i.e. the shortest path with the lowest pressure mediation of anti-Cartesian value, i.e. inertia itself. Well, when we say ether, people say, what's the ether? What's it made of? Well, it was made of anything would be ether by definition. But the correct definition of ether is the original denotation of the term inertia. Absolute maximum capacitance with no dissipation of energy. There's no parasitic draw on it. So the torus, i.e. the magnetic field, literally the geometry of force and motion. Center of a torus, there is no torus, there's just that hole. What does that tell you about magnetism? Well, it tells you magnetism using apophotic retroductive logic will tell you that magnetism is the byproduct of something else. And it is. It's the dielectric field and discharge. Light circuit rebounding against nothing. Coaxial circuit. Well, that tells you everything you need to know about light. Almost everything. Gravity are not objects accelerating. It's correct observation, but incorrect conclusion. It's the same stupidity of current humanity that thinks, well, these two are magnets, they're accelerating towards one another, therefore that's magnetic attraction, because they're magnets. You got two objects accelerating in space, or accelerating towards one another. So, well, how do you know that? Well, because I'm looking at it. Look at that. They're both going right towards each other. Gravity is an acceleration, but it's not in the mutual acceleration of either object toward one another. And you can see this, and I have countless videos of it underneath the supercell. When the magnets are accelerating, they're not accelerating towards one another, rather towards a null pressure point between both. There's the same null pressure point between both of two magnets mutually accelerating as there is the black hole on either side, seen underneath the supercell of what you're looking at basically is this end of the hyperboloid versus this end of the hyperboloid. They're accelerating towards here. Now you can see these are spatial lobes, right? You got a lobe over here and a lobe over here, and here we got nothing. In the case of this, there's a little hole there that the sand falls through, but you're taking it too far. A true hyperboloid, it would be called a two-plane hyperboloid, meaning there's separate lobes that actually null out at zero. But it's not zero, it's the absence of mass and magnitude, or what humans call dimensionality. So there's no such thing as magnetic attraction, and no two or more objects in space are accelerating towards one another. There is actually electrostatic torsion, the discharge of which of the mass is no different than the desaturation of electrostatic discharge in the case of lightning. You actually see lightning, and people think, well, it's cloud-to-ground strikes. You know, it's striking from here to here. Now, I know that's what they see, human beings. But what's happening is a desaturation of the charge that's actually built up in the sky, and it's discharging in the counter space. Even if you were to incorrectly think it was a discharge into the ground, a ground is nothing other than an electrical term to refer to counter space. Everything tries to ground itself. What that means is all torsion or tension, which is what dielectricity is a discharge into counter space. More accurately, however, it is a discharge as counter space, i.e. as the ether. In other words, the complete elimination of the dissipation of its own energy matrix, which is then inertial. So, technically, gravity is not a field. It's an anti-field. There's only one dimension. There's only one field modality. That's the field modality of force. What about that other force? I mean, it's not a force at all. Dielectricity. It says the conjugate geometry of the universe. It is. Magnetism's the dielectric field, so that's since day one. But the increasing inertia and acceleration, i.e. centripetal convergence, is not a field. It's an anti-field. So we have spatial and we have anti-spatial, i.e. we have inertial and we have force. Centrifugal force and motion, inertia and acceleration towards counter space, which is, of course, centripetal. Technically, there's only one dimension. Technically, there's only one field. Wow, that hairy armpit chick called Mother Nature gets a lot more simple, doesn't she? Ha! Doesn't she? See, like this, you can explain the entirety of the universe to a 5-year-old. Maybe not a 5-year-old. Depends on, if in Europe it would be a 5-year-old. To an American it might be a 10-year-old. I'm not picking on Americans. Discharge and gravity, of course, are anti-dimensional. To say something, well, the energy was grounded. So you're saying it was grounded as inertia, it was grounded in counter space. Ground is just another fancy way. Of course, counter space is a freaky word. It's kind of ridiculous. What do you mean counter space? I don't understand it. Well, we have to first understand and explain to you the conjugate geometry of the universe. Force of motion, inertia, and acceleration. The torus and the hyperboloid. Negative image of a torus, the hyperboloid. Negative image of a hyperboloid is a torus. Take you about a half an hour to explain that. Better to use demonstrations. Yeah? Visual demonstrations. Humans are really visual. The sharper you are, however, the fewer visuals you need. Isn't it interesting how that works? If you got a really sharp mind, you can visualize it. You don't need little models like, look at this, Johnny. Here's a little model of a hyperboloid. So technically, there's only one dimension. Discharge and gravity are anti-dimensional once again. Nature, once again, follows Occam's razor, and Mother Nature is that Luddite, anti-intellectual, she only works off force and motion, inertia, and acceleration, which is no different than saying pressure mediation, hairy armpit chick with a hemp skirt and muddy feet. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful you don't need a PhD of a professor of physics who gets it wrong? Those are the people who literally said, gravity is the emission of negative momentum gluons. On the level. That is crazy talk. That's not me saying that. That is them saying it. Dielectricity is dendritic. In the case of an object, it is hyperboloidal. But dendritic discharge, which is a grounding, is no different than the hyperboloidal geometry of a mass. Say this piece of clear lucite were a magnet, like a big fat bar magnet. Then, of course, this interior hyperboloid would be thence the geometry of the discharge towards counter space, which would culminate right here. And right around the periphery would be the plane of inertia. Makes it simple. Simple conjugate geometry, the yin and the yang of the entire universe. Quite literally. Counterspatial, ether, stress, or strain, as in the case of dielectricity. Lightning discharge, desaturation into counter space. Even Eric Dollard says this, only super slightly different. He's right. Explaining the coaxial, toroidal rarefaction compression circuit of light then becomes simple. Have you ever asked yourself why this fundamental geometry of magnetism, which is toroidal, the center of which is nothing? The hole in the torus, or the toroidal field, there's nothing there. The vector of acceleration of gravity is not towards two objects or more objects towards each other. And you can literally see this underneath the supercell. I have countless videos showing it, or the acceleration towards right here. You can see a little hole forming right here between two objects. That is where space is erased. Space has no properties. It's the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. It is literally impedancy. What's the inversion of impedancy? Isn't that pure potential? Well, that's no different than saying inertia itself. Absolute, pure potential with no parasitic discharge upon it. That would be like a perfect battery. Batteries normally dissipate at certain rates depending on the type of battery, but it is literally the definition of a perfect battery. The homeostasis of absolute charge. Geez, that makes it really simple. Space being impedancy, space being the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. What's the negative image absolute of impedancy? Pure impedancy, energy impedancy. Because pure energy impedancy is the manifestation of force. And the after effect of force is, of course, space. Therefore, increasing inertia and acceleration, which is the opposite of centrifugal force, is the opposite of energy impedancy, which is pure absolute potential, which is no different than saying capacitance, pure capacitance, or saying the ether itself, or saying counter space, or saying ground. I hope you liked this video. If you ever want to contact me, my information is in the description below, including a definition, list of terms, which I keep telling people is there. Any donations are always warmly welcome, also too in the description. I read every comment. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Lux Veritas. Nailed it!